Hi, this is John Harcher, and welcome to episode 21 of Valleys of Numenor. Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy is one of the acknowledged masterpieces of the science fiction genre, and it's tempted many artists to try to translate it to the big or small screen. For decades, it remained a pipe dream, but in 2021, it became reality thanks to David S. Goyer. So, how did he do with this next to impossible task? Okay, as I mentioned at the end of the last episode, we're going to be doing a little bouncing back and forth. With the announcement of the season 2 premiere of Foundation on Apple Plus on July 14th, I'd figured I'd better catch everybody up on the show. To be honest, it hasn't left too much of a mark in the popular culture. Maybe it'll draw a little more attention as things move on, provided it gets somewhere near the ending the creators have in mind. So what we'll do is we'll do a recap of episodes 1 through 5, kind of short ones like I did with Rings of Power. Then do the Tarzan of the Movies episode sometime in June. Then recap episodes 6 through 10. Then sometime in July do the wider Edgar Rice Burroughs universe. Then after that's all done, move on to season 2 of Foundation. Had to come up with this on the fly since they just announced it kind of out of nowhere, but hopefully this should work. Isaac Asimov is regarded as one of the greatest science fiction writers of the 20th century. His influence runs deep in both the literary world and in popular culture. His Three Laws of Robotics is probably his most well known creation/concept. His literary career spanned 50 years, starting with his first story in astounding science fiction magazine, Nightfall. From there, he began to work on his robot series. Many of those would be collected in the book I, Robot. He continued his work with artificial life in the 50s with the two detective novels, The Caves of Steel and The Naked Sun, which had human detective Elijah Bailey and robot R. Daniel Oliva solving mysteries. Remember that robot's name, it's going to come up again later. His other group of stories would be based on Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. All empires must fall, but can they be saved? That's what Asimov set out to explore in his Foundation series, also appearing in Astounding Science Fiction. It began with two stories in 1942, Foundation and Bridle and Saddle, and picked up in 1944 with The Wedge and The Big and the Small. These four stories were collected along with a brand new opening story in 1951 under the title Foundation. The story titles were changed to reflect the characters who were important to the plots. The new story was called The Psychohistorians. Foundation became the Encyclopedists, Bridle and Saddle became the Mayors, The Wedge became the Traders, and The Big and the Small became the Merchant Princes. The general idea behind the series is far in the future, an enormous galactic empire is on the verge of collapse, sending the galaxy into chaos for 30,000 years. However, a mathematician, Harry Seldon, has developed a theory called psychohistory, and with it, he can come up with a plan to cut the chaos down to a mere 1,000 years. Whew, thank God. He would make sure the knowledge that had been collected would be kept safe, so when it is needed to again rebuild, it would be there. The story would continue in four other stories that would be collected in two other books, Foundation and Empire and Second Foundation. Then from there, he wrote a few novels in the early 50s based on various points of the Trantonian Empire. He did his two detective novels, started but abandoned a third, then kind of set all these aside to do other things like work on the story for the movie Fantastic Voyage. Right around that time in 1966, the Foundation trilogy was given a Hugo Award for the greatest science fiction series of all time. By the time the 80s rolled around, his publisher started bugging him about doing more Foundation and robot novels. After some hesitation, he obliged but took things one step further. He used a series of four books, Foundation's Edge, The Robots of Dawn, Foundation and Earth, and Robots and Empire, to explicitly unite his two universes. Then in the late 80s into the early 90s, right before his passing, he wrote two prequels, Prelude to Foundation and Forward to Foundation, that solidified this and set up R. Daniel Oliva as one of the key figures in history, especially in one of his guises as Ito de Merzel, advisor to the Emperor Leon I. Now, as one of science fiction's crowning achievements, there have been talk about translating it to the big or small screen for years. The problem has always been, how do you create a single story about the fall of an empire over hundreds of years? Especially the first novel, which is five separate stories that slowly put the pieces in place with not a lot of action. How do you do that in one 2 or 3 hour movie? Well, you don't. That's why it didn't happen until now. Prolific comic and science fiction film writer David S. Goyer came up with an approach as a TV series. This way, he gave himself room to deal with a lot of the concept Asimov came up with in the original series, as well as those he added in with the later novels. It was supposed to go to HBO at one point, but they passed on it, so it ended up at the burgeoning and now somewhat successful, thank you, Ted Lasso, Apple Plus streaming service. The series wouldn't concentrate on big stars, but did have a few known actors. Jared Harris, son of Richard, who has an extensive and wide ranging filmography of his own, would play Harry Seldon. Lee Pace, best known as Orlando Bloom's father in The Hobbit and Chris Pratt's dancing partner in Guardians of the Galaxy, would play Emperor Cleon I, or should I say, one aspect of Emperor Cleon I. Character actor Terrence Mann would play another version of Cleon. The Emperor had himself cloned and lived simultaneously as three regents called Brother Dawn, a child, Brother Day, a middle aged man, and Brother Dusk, an old man. So let's dive into the first episode, The Emperor's Peace. We hear a woman telling a story about herself and how she wanted to learn about the breadth of the Empire. We focus in on the planet Terminus, a dark, desolate world on the far outer reaches of the galaxy. We hear that this world would soon become the focus of our story. As the speedercraft goes by, a group of children head out on their own. After a while, they come upon a giant structure known as the Vault. It has some kind of sonic protective field around it. As a game, the kids would try to see how close they could get to it and plant a flag. One child tries but gives up. Another tries but ends up passing out as he nears the structure. His friends show how much they care by running away. Later, the boy Polly is dragged down from off the hill by a hooded figure. The woman is a warden, one of the guards to keep people safe. She tells him to stop trying to get to the vault. It does not want people to approach. The narrator then cites three names: Salvor Hardin, Holger Mallow, and the mule, as names she would come to know later. The scene then switches to 35 years earlier on the planet Trantor, capital of the Galactic Empire. Here we meet Harry Seldon, who's described as a mathematician, a martyr, and a murderer. He's talking to another man, Raish, about how things are falling apart and how there is hope for the future. They are discussing someone's arrival. We find out who in the next scene. It then shifts to the planet Synax, where a girl, Gal Dornick, is reciting prime numbers. She's preparing to leave her world, much to her mother's displeasure, and apparently all the other people in her village. They take a boat out into the middle of the water as a giant ship lands to take her on her journey to Trantor. The ship takes her to a larger vessel called a jump ship. She meets another traveler, Gerald, who shows her how to prepare for her trip. The passengers get strapped and plugged in. The ship puts everyone in stasis while they make the voyage across the galaxy to the homeworld. She briefly wakes herself up when she's not supposed to and sees the light show outside as the ship is traveling as fast as it's going. An intergalactic flight attendant drugs her to knock her out. Some people might like that for today's travel. They dock at a tower looming hundreds of miles above Trantor's surface. When inside, a hologram of the Emperor bids everyone to respect and enjoy the peace, hence the episode's title. While there, they view a military funeral of sorts for soldiers lost fighting two outer worlds, Anacreon and Thespis. Remember those names. Gal and Gerald get in a car that will take them down to the planet's surface. It will take 14 hours from top to bottom. Though in actuality, Trantor isn't so much a planet as a gigantic city with thousands of levels. Some people never end up seeing the surface. As mentioned, it's ruled by the three clones of Cleon I, brothers Dawn, Day, and Dusk. The middle clone, Day, appears to be the main one in charge. He confronts a loyal worker who was caught with one of Harry Seldon's writings in his quarters and has him disintegrated. The three clones are having dinner when they are told by their servant Demerzel that envoys from Anacreon and Thespis are coming. The two planets are feuding, which was the cause of the trouble, and now the Empire plans to take care of it. The two planets bear gifts to their emperor, a bow from Anacreon's greatest hero, and a book from Thespis. We then find out the war was over an asteroid that drifted out of one planet's orbit and into the other. The Thespesians are worried over this religious meeting, while the Anacreons want it for their palladium on it. Meanwhile, Gal finally reaches the surface and looks out for Raish, who is there to meet her. He takes her to the main library first, where Selden joins her. She tells him how she ended up finding the solution to the problem that won her the internship, as it were. He then tells her they will both be arrested tomorrow and about what psychohistory forecasts about the future of the Empire. Namely, Trantor and the Empire will be destroyed. They're not particularly happy about hearing that, fearing it will terrify the public. So they created the quote-unquote internship to find the one person who can prove Harry Selden wrong, namely her. Gal goes to the Seer Church on the planet and speaks to the priest there. He tells her he can help her, but it's understood she must see Selden as forsaken by God. She manages to relax by sleeping, but had a dream about her homeworld and then takes comfort in the writing Selden gave her. As predicted, she's arrested in the morning. Harry is put on trial for sedition. During the trial, Selden repeats his predictions about the destruction of the Empire within 500 years, but his plan will shorten the Dark Ages from 30,000 years to just 1,000. The foundation of the new civilization will be an Encyclopedia Galactica that will exist in many places, so one cataclysm will not destroy it. During a break in the trial, Gal runs into Gerald, who turns out to be an agent for the Emperors. He tries to get her to say that Selden's predictions aren't true, even if they are. He presents her with an object that has messages hidden as a mathematical equation. In herself, of course, she figures it out. Later, she is made to reveal why she's such an outcast on her world of Synax, namely all the scientists and mathematicians were executed as heretics by the church. She then proceeds to confirm Selden's predictions. The two of them are led off as Brother Dusk orders them executed. As they're being led away, Gal notices something wrong with the Star Tower. On board, an Anacreon and a Thespian both launch a suicide attack, tearing the hundreds of miles long tower apart and sending it towards the surface of the planet. The wreckage has killed untold numbers of Trantonians, likely hundreds of millions. Brother Day calls the two envoys back to the throne room to let them know their gifts will be returned. Raish visits Gal in prison and tries to get her to recant her confirmation of Selden's predictions. She won't, and the guards take her to the throne room. Harry and Gal are before the Emperor. Selden explains why he's not surprised the attack happened, but Gal ups the ante by saying if Selden dies, Cleon will be killed since there'd be no hope. Selden confirms there is a way to slow the inevitable decline and the cloning of the Emperors. Needless to say, it doesn't go over well with the three of them. When they are brought back later, Demerzel tells them they will not be executed, but sent off to Terminus to build this foundation they speak of. The world is desolate, and their planetary neighbors just so happen to be Anacreon and Thespis. So they will have to take a slow ship that'll take them 50,000 light years in just under 900 days. As they leave, they see the Anacreon and Thespesian envoys led away in chains. We go back to Terminus and back to 35 years later. Salvor Hardin leaves her dwelling and without interruption walks right up to the vault and gets it to open. As Gal's narration tells us, psychohistory can accurately predict what large swaths of humanity will do. When it comes to individuals, well, they don't quite have that nailed down just yet. So this was a very loose adaptation of the first story in Foundation, the one written in 1950. It does the job of introducing the concept, the main characters, and little bits of drama to enhance the conflict. In the original story, Gal was just the country mouse who ended up in the big city to work with Dr. Selden. The trial happens and Harry Selden is exiled to Terminus, but he doesn't expect it to make it due to his health. Cleon does not appear in the original stories, but is named as a previous emperor who doesn't meet with a nice ending. Gerald does make an appearance, as does Lors Avakim, the lawyer. Raish and Demerzel are characters from the last two novels, Prelude the Foundation and Forward the Foundation. An important character from those novels, Dors Venabili, does not appear at all in the first season. From the way they've approached the material, it's unclear if she ever will appear. If so, it will have to be in flashbacks. Salvor Hardin is a character in the two original Foundation stories from 1942, though they made a few changes to the character for the translation to the screen. We'll deal with those as we move through the remaining episodes. One more brief note for the premiere episode: the prosecuting advocate is played by Dr. Bashir and Doran Martell himself, Alexander Siddig. With so many lesser known people involved, nice to see a familiar and experienced face. Next time, we'll go over episode 2 and see if we get to Terminus and if all of our characters make it there. Please hit the subscribe button if you like what you're hearing. I'm John Hartar. Thanks for listening.